And so we came home and Kenny bunked me and said, hey, I'll start a Facebook group and see how many trainers are out there. And so I start up a Facebook group, and a day later I get a call from this Noel trainer in Dublin. And he says, well, hi, I see this. And he tells me on that call the original trainer, who goes back to St. Patrick. And he tells me this whole story, which blew my mind. I said, this is incredible. And that was 2015.
Well, just so their audience can get this is a crazy, crazy story. I've heard some crazy stories, but I'm going to let you, Kevin. We're going to let him tell the story.
Oh, absolutely! It's an amazing
it's
story.
Something. So it goes back to St. Patrick, and Trainer wasn't exactly a name as it was an occupation. So I'm going to just leave it at that. We're going to let the master speak, but give us the story and. Got all the time in the world.
It's an amazing story. It's blown all of us who have heard it, but it's in the literature, so it's a true story. And that Saint Patrick, when he was sent into Ireland to bring the Christianity, the way he went about it was he'd go from little kingdom to little kingdom.
Yeah.
And he'd go in the kingdom and he'd introduce himself, and he'd convert the king, who then would convert all his people. And the king could be just the king of the hill, or he could be a bigger king, dependent. And then he'd ask for one of the king's retainers to go with him to the next place as sort of a letter of introduction. And so he was at the king of the Kelly family in Roscommon, Ireland, and he converted the king Kelly in this area, and that he wanted to go in the next place, and he needed someone to go with him. And so this young man named Aidan McCartan, who at that point was married and had a couple of kids.
He did, yes.
He said, I will go with you to the next place.
Yeah.
And so Aidan McCartan and St. Patrick and maybe a couple went off to the next place, and it turned out that Aidan McCartan stayed with St. Patrick and didn't go back to his family in Roscommon, and stayed with him. And this was towards the end of St. Patrick's life. And so in stories was that this young man, McCartan, was helpful to St. Patrick in helping him get around when he got older. And there's pictures in stained glass windows in the churches in Ireland of him carrying St. Patrick over a stream.
Wow.
And so St. Patrick said, well, you're my trainer. In Gaelic, it's got many more letters. But you're my trainer. Trainer means strong arm. And so you're my strong arm to Trainer. And so that's where the trainer came from. And so then time passed, and St. Patrick had a habit when he converts somebody, he would then set up a diocese. And that one of his faithful people, he'd say, okay, you found this diocese. And so time passed, and towards the end of Patrick's life, and this is a true story, apparently Traynor said, well, I've been helping you along here for a while, but you haven't given me a monastery yet. And so...
What's in it for me?
Yeah, what's in it for me? I've been doing all this for you,
Yeah.
So what's with this? And so Patrick said, fine, you go over here, and this is an area, it's called Clogher Diocese. It covers now a part of northern County Monaghan and County Tyrone and Fermanagh. Fermanagh, I guess that was more properly pronounced, in Northern Ireland today. And he said, okay, we'll give you that, and you set up the monastery there. These days, they would call that person who set it up a bishop. So then this Trainer, full name is Aidan McCartan, became the first bishop of this diocese. St. Patrick died in 456, and Trainer McCartan remained a bishop there for 50 years.
Wow.
Died in 506. And that was the first Trainer. Later, the Roman Catholics came in, and 400 and 500 years later to Ireland, and took away all of the system that St. Patrick had set up and put in the Roman Catholic system, and they made saints of all these original people. So Aidan McCartan became Saint McCartan.
Wow.
And legitimately, and I've read the story about that, and there are now 4 St. McCartan cathedrals in Ireland. 2 are Church of Ireland and 2 are Roman Catholic.
Wow. So the church that's in Monaghan County that we toured,
The big one.
that's one of them.
That's one of the four. It's the newest one.
Oh, really?
Because the Catholic Church was outlawed in Ireland for several hundred years, and so they weren't allowed to build them. And so only in the late 19th century were Roman Catholic churches able to be built again, and that was built in the end of the 19th century.
Wow. You have to see this church. It's absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, it's. I was in it. Paul and I were both in it. It certainly is bigger than our churches for sure. You had mentioned something about the reason that they were saints is to hold them. Like they became saints as a way of keeping them within the Roman Catholicism. And how did Saint Traynor, if you will, become a saint? This is an interesting story as well.
Well, to become a saint in the Roman Catholic faith, you need to have a miracle.
2 miracles, I think.
Is it 2?
I think it's 2.
Maybe in the 13th century.
Maybe it was
only
one. They probably just to get you in the door.
Heard of the one, but the and it's a good one, and it's deeply rooted in an event that occurred that's in the literature.
Right.
It might not have been exactly that event, but the event that is the miracle event was deeply known and loved by the people at the time, and they just merely made it a miracle event. And it was basically that Trainer was going with St. Patrick, and they went into one of these kingdoms, and the king was hostile to St. Patrick.
Right.
And
Want
so,
any part of them?
yeah, he said, no way, and he sent his son out to tell this guy, Patrick, and his follower, that you can't come into my kingdom. And so the son went out, and he said to St. Patrick, you can't, at that point he wasn't a saint, said, you can't come into my kingdom. And Patrick did something that changed the boy's mind, and he said, okay, I can see you're special, and invited him into the kingdom, at which point his father was very angry that his son let this person in, and was so angry that Patrick was there and the son let him in. He took his great sword and was going to whack St. Patrick's head.
Right.
And that Trainer put his hand on the shoulder of
Froze
that king and froze it.
Oh, okay. There's a miracle.
It was a miracle.
There's
And
a
that the king dropped the sword and said, okay, I see something here, and he became a follower.
Wow.
That's the story.
Well, it's kind of interesting to know that the original Trainer that we all go back to is in fact a saint.
Yeah, so
Which
he is the saint.
Yeah, he is the saint. So
So there's hope for you yet, Kevin. Is that what you're trying to say?
probably not for me.
No, it's all good.
It
Ask
took
me,
quite-
mother,
It
I'm
took
a
quite
saint
a while
now.
to get down to making him a saint, because they had to start with Patrick.
Yeah.
And then they worked their
their
way
way
down, and by the time they got to these original fellows who were not major players in the game, but it was 200 or 300 years later, they got around to that. So
That's pretty cool, though. So you were saying that there was 6 sons. No, would it be 6 sons of that man, or
that's the DNA has said it, and the DNA and the genealogy is hard to find, because
Yeah.
the records most of the records in Ireland
Yeah.
have been destroyed. It's
Destroyed, yeah.
1923, I
Yeah.
think it was, and that they're resurrecting them.
They are. I don't
Yeah,
know how
yeah.
far along they are, but I know one thing: they are in fact resurrecting.
And
them.
they are, and they're going to hopefully have even some bits of carbon that were blown when they blew
Yeah.
up the custom house.
That's
They're
right.
putting this back together. But for the moment, you can't get much genealogical information before 1811. So it's hard to get genealogy going way back. But the DNA project that we have has identified a common ancestor that everybody goes back to, who lived around 1300. And then out of that, there are 6 strains out of that one person that are separate but
Yeah.
related to that one person. So you could say it was a father and 6 sons.
Yeah.
Most likely that, but it's a DNA
Yeah, it's
match.
yeah.
Okay.
There-
And do
There's
we know the
6
6
individuals.
Do we know the 6 names? There was
I know that we are role trainers,
Role.
and David is right here. David, he's operating the.
he's
camera.
operating the
Hi,
camera.
David.
He's a
Yeah.
cameraman.
And David, as far as I understand, David, you're Murphy.
Morris.
Morse. I'm
He's a
sorry.
Morse. So
yeah.
that's a nickname because the person running the DNA project, John Trainor, has artificially named those 6 people by Greek alphabet, alpha, beta, something like that.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm an Amon, which is E, in my little group. And my little group's kind of small. Some other groups are
Yeah.
bigger. But we all come back to that, and so that's the DNA. So we know that the trainers go back 800 years before that,
Yeah.
and so part of the DNA is to try to work back to that.
Yes.
That's really amazing, actually. That
We all carry the original Celtic gene.